Good morning to you all. Welcome to this circle of friends, this circle of family, this circle of community that gathers together each and every week, that seeks to be lifelong seekers, learners, questers in the spiritual journey. And as we do so, we gather here in this safe place, regardless of who you are, where you've come from, your spiritual tradition, your age, your identity, your sexuality, your gender. We're all welcome here in this circle, and we gather as community that embraces each other and affirms one another. We also gather with gratitude every time we gather for this sacred land on which we gather, not only because all land is sacred, but because of the great history that this land has to give to us. We are grateful and acknowledge with respect the history and spirituality and culture of the peoples of Treaty 6 and with our Métis brothers and sisters. And so we gather in this place, grateful for all that's come before, grateful for all that is before us. And as we do so in community, we gather in many ways, with our words, with our smiles, with our hugs, and with our singing. Let's warm this space between us with a song. Today being the first Sunday of November, we gather with the special privilege to honor a Christian tradition of All Saints' Day, which has in this community become a way for us to honor all that have gone before and all who inspire us as lights in our lives. And as we share that ritual a little bit later of candle lighting, we seek to center ourselves in this place where we are, in the midst of those who have gone before and those yet to come. Right here, in the present, let's center ourselves with these words. Into this place we gather, listening beyond words, the rhythm of all that is sacred. We gather seeking solace, crosses that are heavy to bear. We gather to share the things in our lives we found to be true. We gather to forgive, bringing each other into hope and renewal. We gather to stand shoulder to shoulder, for no one should stand alone. Into this place we come, grateful for gifts of life, mindful of the mystery of death, and seeking to be inspired to live fully in this time that is now. We share words with one another that seek to not only center us, but to strengthen the intentions of which we come, of which we live. And so we speak these words together. We open now, sacred presence, beyond our capacity to know, but within our experience to know. We open the holy oneness to which we belong. to our deep connection with Spirit, with each other, with earth and all creation. Not seeking to dismantle fears that isolate and divide, to shrink our arrogance and stretch our compassion, to open our eyes, unclench our fists, unstop our fears, and let love have its way in us. And so we pray. Amen.
In one of the stories, one of our myths of beginning that our tradition gives us, light was called out of darkness. Light was separated from the darkness. And all that came into being came at the invitation to let there be light. Each of us come into life in response to the invitation, let there be light. And there is, the particular light that each of us are. We come into this day in the light of all that is past, into the fog of all that is future, into the gift of all that is now, in all its trouble and its beauty. We bring ourselves to this day, to this light, with gratitude. I want to read an excerpt today from a book entitled Love and Death, My Journey Through the Valley of the Shadow. It's written by Forrest Church, who for many years was the senior pastor of All Souls Unitarian Church in New York City. In 2008, he was diagnosed with esophageal cancer and was given a very short time to live. He lived longer than the experts predicted he would live, and part of the legacy of his life was the writing he was able to do in the final year of his life. This book is one of those writings that come to us after his diagnosis, as he was facing not the theoreticalness of death, but the reality of death. And he writes in Love and Death about the miracle of being here. The odds against each one of us being here this morning are mind-staggering, so much so they couldn't even be computed. Had I been paying more reverent attention, even a 5% chance that I might live, not to mention outlive my father and grandfather, should have found me dancing on the ceiling. We're talking miracles here, not an unlikely miracle like the parting of the Red Sea for Moses to escape the Egyptians, or stopping the sun for Joshua to win a battle, but the miracle of water itself, in which living organisms can incubate, and just enough warmth and light from the sun to establish ideal conditions for life to be nurtured and develop here on earth. But consider the odds more intimately. Your parents had to couple at precisely the right moment for the one possible sperm to fertilize the one possible egg that would result in your conception. Right then, the odds were still 1,000,000 to 1 against you being the answer to the question your biological parents were consciously or unconsciously posing. And that's just the beginning of the miracle. The same unlikely happenstance must repeat itself throughout the generations. Going back 10 generations, this miracle has to repeat itself 1,000 times. 1,250,000 times if we go back 20 generations. That's right. From the turn of the 12th century until today, we each have, mathematically speaking, approximately 2.5 million direct ancestors. This remarkable pyramid turns in upon itself, of course, with individual ancestors participating in multiple lines of generation until we trace ourselves back to when our ancestors, the founding couple, whom each one of us carries in our bones, began the inexorable process that finally gave birth to all of us, kith and kin, blood brothers and sisters of the same mighty mystery. And that's only the egg and sperm part of the miracle. Remember, each of these ancestors had to live to puberty. For those whose bloodlines twined through Europe, and there were like tragedies around the globe, not one of your 1,000,000 direct forebears died as children during the Great Plague, for instance, which mowed down half of Europe with a mighty scythe. Then we have to go back further to our pre-mammalian ancestors, and back from all the way to the Paramecilian, and then beyond that to the pinball of planets and stars playing out their course, spinning back through time to the Big Bang itself. Mathematically, our death is a simple inevitability, whereas our life hinges on an almost infinite sequence of perfect accidents. From a visible and then invisible thread connects every one of us in an unbroken line, genetically and kinetically, to the very beginning of life. Think about it. The universe was pregnant with us when it was born. This is the insight of one living in the shadow of death.
After the story of Exodus from Egypt, stories come of the Israelites' journey through the wilderness. This is one of those stories. The whole congregation of the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The Israelites said to them, "If only we died by the hand of the land in Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots and ate our fill of bread. But you've brought us out into the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." From the wilderness, the whole congregation of the Israelites journeyed by stages. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water there for people to drink. And the people again quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." And Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me?" But the people thirsted there for water, and the people complained against Moses and said, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" So Moses cried out, "What shall I do with these people? They're almost ready to stone me. What shall I do with these people?" In the gospel tradition, in the Jesus tradition, the writers of Matthew and Luke give us this story. Jesus said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear, for life is more than food, and your body more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet they're fed. And can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to the span of your life? If then you're not able to do small things like that, why do you worry about the rest? Consider also the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not clothed like one of these." These are among the legendary stories passed down from the wilderness tradition of ancient Israel and the Jesus tradition of the first century. May we find wisdom for our living.
We've probably all had this experience. Whether you're in a shopping mall, or an airport, or on a hiking trail, generally when we stand before one of those maps and we're staring at the words, "You are here," it's because we want to be somewhere else. And we're looking at the map to find out to get from where we are to where we actually want to be. And we already know that where we are isn't where we want to be. And that's the story of our ancient ancestors in a nutshell. In what follows that foundational story of ancient Egypt, that identity story of the miraculous escape from a cruel regime, we'd expect stories of relief and gratitude. And instead, we have stories of regret and anxiety. In that freedom beyond Egypt, we have a community who again and again seem to be standing in front of a map that says, "You are here." And they want to be anywhere but where they are. So much so that they lament they'd rather go back to being slaves than be faced with the responsibility of finding food and drink in this wilderness. They complain that they'd rather find themselves in the barrio again, working their butts off making bricks, than be here in this harsh terrain of what is the Sinai Peninsula. There's a kind of particular nostalgia for the hardships they've known in the past, a deep discontent with where they are now, and a great angst about the future. The early, emerging Christian community must have found themselves facing a similar kind of map after the death of their leader. So much of the writings we have in the Christian scriptures are addressed to those who find themselves still here after their leader's been executed. And surely they're wondering how they got to be here, how they got from their very uncomplicated peasant lives as fishermen to now be on the radar of the authorities. And how to go on from here, with the brutality of the Roman Empire targeting them with torture and death, and the hostility of their religious leaders expelling them from their synagogues. Seeking to help those early followers of the path of Jesus find courage to face that oppression, gospel writers like Luke and Matthew addressed that very anxiety by these kinds of teaching stories. The one we heard a moment ago that has Jesus of Nazareth invite his anxiety-ridden friends to accompany him on a field trip, away from the demands of daily life, away from the distractions of the domestic, in the splendor of the unspoiled. The story has Jesus invite his friends, step off the dusty road and stroll through a field and consider the lilies and listen to the birds. I don't think this is intended to be some kind of romanticized experience of the natural world. Surely Jesus and these fishermen who traipsed around with him are well aware of the storms on the Galilee. They're well aware of the Judean wilderness in all of its harshness. They're well aware that the natural world is a place of terror as well as a place of beauty, that it's a place of life and also a place of death. These friends who outlived him lived in very anxious times, in uncertain times, in the dog-eat-dog world of occupied Palestine, where fear was the order of the day, where the gap was ever widening between the disgustingly rich and the desperately poor, where it was all about the exercise of the empire and its power and the power of the institutions it had co-opted, where surely the prevailing wisdom was, watch your back, look out for number one. And by the end of that first century, bitter times had become brutal times for the friends of Jesus. So much so that Luke and Matthew give us this piece of alternative wisdom attributed to Jesus of Nazareth and passed down to those who are now the second and third generation of those who had survived him. And it's passed down as advice for living in anxious times. How to be where you are when it's the last place on the planet you want to be. So were we to hear this advice, knowing it's shaped in anxious and uncertain times, what would we hear? If we consider the life of a lily, we see a living being that opens from the soil in which it's rooted to live briefly in beauty and then return again to the ground that gave it its being. And its being is fragile. Its lifetime is short. But the lily doesn't seem to be preoccupied with a quest for permanence. Doesn't spend its days figuring out how to survive forever. But seems content to open to its day in the sun and the rain, accept its place in the field where it finds itself. And if we were to pay close attention, we'd likely notice that those flowers that are nearest to death are the most fragrant. And we'd be struck by their capacity to not close themselves off to the world, sensing that their day is almost done, but instead to keep opening wider and wider, surrendering their petals one by one to become the humus of newness. Standing there in the trust of today without any claim on the future and without clinging to the bulb of the past. As Forrest Church approached his own death, he focused on the miracle of being here. He lived into a new relationship with that signpost, "You are here." By discovering the miracle of having been born, he changed his relationship with the mystery of having to die. And he spent no energy on the question what he had done to deserve a death sentence, but saw it as the birthright of being alive and became enchanted with the miracle of life, the gift of being here. So much in life invites us to learn the spirituality of acceptance, of standing before those words, "You are here," without nostalgia and without angst. To rise up out of the broken ground beneath our being, to rise up out of the broken hearts that beat within us, and to open in vulnerability to the garden we find ourselves in, to blossom and bloom in our place, to take our place colorfully in the family of things, to live by letting go, and return gratefully to the ground that gave us our being. Unlike that map in the mall or the airport or the one along the trail, unlike that moving dot on the GPS that guides our movement from here to there, the life map only shows us where we are in relationship to the road we've already traveled. The rest of it isn't drawn on any signpost. And life invites us into a profound relationship with where we are, with right here, right now, making peace with the past of then and there, in a grateful acceptance of the gift of being here. Because life is surrender, not acquiescence, but acceptance. In the words of Barbara Brown Taylor, the treasure we seek in life requires no lengthy expedition, no expensive equipment, no superior aptitude, no special company. All we lack is the willingness to imagine that we already have everything we need. The only thing missing is our consent to be where we are. We pause in the midst of all that life is for us, all its trouble and all its beauty. We pause in this silence we share with each other to consider what it would be to give our consent to be where we are, to restore our relationship with the present. And were we to do so, perhaps the lilies and the ravens would become our spiritual guides, instructing us in a spirituality of acceptance, freeing us from the the worst two words in our vocabulary, what if? To embrace what now? And to embrace it with grace and courage. As is our tradition on this first Sunday in November, we share the names of those we hold in our hearts who have gone before us from this life. You will, after a series of names, hear the words, "You who light the path before us." And if you would respond each time, "May we be faithful to the flame we have received." You who light the path before us, may we be faithful to the flame we have received. In the holy mystery, in which all that is has its being, we are seized with wonder. The wonder that we're here at all in this place and time, living these brief lives on this singular planet. We're seized with the wonder that we're not lost in the stars, that life stirs as mysteriously present in us as it does in the galaxies, stirring us to stories and songs and prayers that bind us to the long story. That Spirit broods over the deep of our lives, healing our hurts, helping us remember, infusing us with the hope that can transform our anxiety into wisdom, pain into beauty, failure into freedom, guilt into understanding.
There have been those among us compassionate enough to stand against cruelty, fierce enough to fight indifference, courageous enough to hold power accountable, prophetic enough to expose the poverty of wealth, bold enough to stare down violence, imaginative enough to hold us from the brink of extinction, ordinary and extraordinary in the witness they have given us.
For those who have gone before us into death but live in our hearts, we pause to remember these beloved ones with deep gratitude. You who light the path before us, may we be faithful to the flame we have received.
You who light the path before us,
may we be faithful to the flame we have received.
in silence, we now name those whose memory we carry and whose names have not been spoken into this circle, but are forever a part of the fabric of life. In the shadow of all that has gone before us, may we burn fully and faithfully all the days of our lives as we light this last candle.
For all who light the path before us,
may we be faithful to the flame we have received. As we prepare to partake in this simple meal with one another, we'll invite your response to our phrases. When you hear "in this sacred space," please respond, "We come face to face with life." Indeed, we meet life, life around us, within us, between us, beyond us, life in the miracle of birth, the mystery of death, life lived in all its reality, its hopes and fears, its clarity and its confusion. In this sacred space,
we come face to face with life. We invite into our present the truth of our past, the mystery of our future, recognizing where we have interfaced with life and truth, finding ourselves in a moment of unity, a moment of acceptance of being where we are. In this sacred space, we come face to face with life.
And so here, as community, we bring our whole selves to ponder, our coming together of people, of ideas, of passions, of challenges, some similar and some radically different from our own. It's in this space on the shore between us and the world where we find common ground where life is lived. In this sacred space, we come face to face with life.
A simple table has long been a sign and a symbol of that kind of coming together, the fusion of our differences, fusion of people, of values, of memories, of our connection with story, of communion, and of communion with the community of life. In this sacred space,
we come face to face with life. We break this bread in celebration of life that rises from our depths, strengthening our compassion, broadening our hope, clarifying our common need. And we pour this cup in celebration of the transformation that flows from our challenges, the change that derives from our interaction, the revolution of love that comes from us meeting life directly. In this sacred space,
we come face to face with life. We are each invited. You need not be a member of this or any church to be welcome at this table. These gifts of bread and juice are simple gifts of a good earth. They are for each of us and for all of us. We come expressing our common humanity, our common hungers and thirsts, our common search for meaning. We come in the gift of this moment to share bread for our journey and the cup of community. In this sacred space, we come face to face with life. We go in the strength of who we are together, who we are for having shared this time together, who we are for having shared the light of those we love, the light of those who have gone before us, the light of those we hold in our hearts. We go in the light of who we are by all that shapes us. We go in grace, in strength, and in courage, knowing that life and death have some very sacred arrangement between them. We go in gratitude for this present moment, for where we are right now.